Harald Hardrada, or Harald III of Norway, 1015 to 1066, was one of the last great Viking warrior kings, renowned for his exploits across Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. Before becoming king, he served as a mercenary in the Byzantine Empire's Varangian Guard, amassing wealth and military experience. He even attempted to conquer England in 1066. However, that marked the end of the Viking invasions in Europe, culminating in his defeat and death at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Regardless, his ambitious campaigns and formidable reputation cemented his legacy as one of the most important figures of the Viking Age, and he is often remembered as the last of the Vikings. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're coming back, it's good to see you again, and if you're completely new here, it's good to meet you. If you want to support the channel, Patreon's in the description, like, comment, sub, all that good stuff. Especially like. That helps YouTube push the video out to a bigger audience, so I'd appreciate that. Now, with that being said, let's get on to our topic for today. Take a deep breath, relax, and let's learn all about Harald Hardrada. Harald came into the world in the year of 1015, though some accounts suggest that 1016 may also be plausible. He was the offspring of Asta Gudbrandsdatter and Sigurd Syr, her second spouse. Sigurd held the title of a petty king over Ringerike, marking him as one of the upland's most formidable and affluent chieftains. Harald's lineage was illustrious. Through his mother, Asta, he was the youngest among the three half-brothers of King Olaf II of Norway, also known as Olaf Haraldsson and later canonized as Saint Olaf. From his early years, Harald exhibited the characteristics of an ambitious rebel, and this set him apart from his older siblings who were quite a bit more grounded and focused on the stewardship of their lands, much like their father. Harald's admiration for Olaf as a role model was clearly evident, reflecting a divergence in aspirations and temperament from his brothers, who were a lot more pragmatic. Now, the legacy of Harald's lineage is steeped in controversy and myth, as it always is around this time. Historical records, particularly those preserved in the Icelandic sagas, like Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, claim a noble descent from King Harald Fairhair for Sigurd, akin to that of Olaf's father, positioning them as descendants of a lineage of notable serenity. However, modern scholars cast a little bit of doubt on these claims, suggesting that the genealogical connections to Harald Fairhair posited by authors centuries after Hardrada's era were more reflective of the social and political narratives of the time, rather than actual histories based in fact. Interestingly, during Harald Hardrada's lifetime, his purported ancestry from Harald Fairhair was scarcely mentioned, and did not significantly influence his claim to the Norwegian throne, an omission that suggests these ancestral claims were likely of little consequence or recognition in his quest for power. The early 11th century was a fairly chaotic time for Norway, marked by conflicts and a pivotal revolt in 1028 that led to the exile of Harald's brother, Olaf. The winds of change began to stir up more in 1030, when news of Olaf's impending return galvanized Harald to muster a force of 600 men from the uplands, eager to unite with his brother. Their reunion in the east of Norway was marked by camaraderie and a shared resolve to reclaim the throne, culminating in the Battle of Stiklestad on July 29, 1030. This battle, a desperate endeavor to dethrone the Danish ruler Knut the Great and restore Olaf to power, ended in tragedy for the brothers. The Norwegian forces loyal to Knut emerged victorious, leading to Olaf's death and leaving Harald grievously wounded. Despite the defeat, his participation in the battle showcased his military prowess, hinting at the legendary figure that he was destined to become. Following the defeat at Stiklestad, Harald fled to eastern Norway with Rogvald Brusason's help, recuperating on a remote farm before heading over the mountains to Sweden. Within a year, he found his way to Kievan Rus, where Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise welcomed him and his men warmly. Yaroslav, who recognized Harald's military skills, made him a captain. Harald's relationship with Yaroslav was also bolstered by his familial connection through his brother Olaf, who had previously sought refuge with Yaroslav. His time in Kievan Rus was marked by his participation in various military campaigns, which included conflicts with the Poles, the Teuts in Estonia, the Byzantines, and several groups of steppe nomads. By the mid-1030s, Harald and his retinue of 500 ventured to Constantinople and joined up with the Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Empire. Despite initial attempts to keep his royal identity a secret, Harald's reputation began to precede him, and he quickly rose to prominence within the Guard. His military endeavors spanned the empire's frontiers, from battling Arab pirates in the Mediterranean to participating in campaigns across Asia Minor, and he even went as far as Mesopotamia, fighting all over the known world. His exploits during this period, including the capture of numerous Arab strongholds, showcased his leadership and valor. Geez, a little bit too early for the Crusades. It would have been nice to have him on board. Now, Harald's adventures also led him to Jerusalem, although the timing and nature of this journey remains a subject of debate. It is possible that after a peace treaty between the Byzantine Empire and the Muslim Fatimid Caliphate, Harald was part of a mission to escort pilgrims to Jerusalem, offering him further opportunity to engage in combat against bandits who were targeting Christians along the roads. In 1038, Harald ventured to Sicily with the Byzantine forces, aiming to reclaim the island from the Saracens under George Maniace's leadership. It was during this campaign that he fought alongside notable Norman mercenaries, including William Iron Arm, and successfully captured 4 Sicilian towns. However, the campaign's conclusion in 1041 marked the beginning of new conflicts in southern Italy, where Harald, leading the Varangian Guard, faced a Lombard-Norman revolt. Despite initial victories, the Byzantines were ultimately defeated by the Normans, and not just in one battle, in several of them. The fallouts from these culminated defeats led to Harold's recall to Constantinople amidst Maniace's imprisonment and all of the other political turmoil. Well, back in Constantinople, Harold's exploits in Bulgaria against the uprising led by Peter del Jan earned him the moniker, and this is probably one of the most sinister nicknames I've ever heard, the Bulgar Burner. I'm sure you can use your imagination of how he was dealing with the Bulgars. Well, despite the controversies surrounding George Maniaces and Emperor Michael IV, Harold received honors and held the emperor's favor, gaining titles within the imperial guard. However, this favor was short-lived. After Michael IV's death in 1041, Harold found himself entangled in the ensuing power struggles. He was then imprisoned under charges that vary among different sources, but they include accusations of defrauding the emperor, even murder, and apparently he was involved in some illicit romantic endeavors. Didn't know you could throw people in jail for that. Guilty as charged. Well, the narrative of Harald's imprisonment and subsequent escape is marked by discrepancies among historical records. Some suggest that he was liberated amidst a revolt against the new emperor Michael V, who was not very popular, and this positioned Harold as a leader among the Varangians who opposed the emperor. Could be. Either way, this revolt culminated in Michael V's dramatic ousting, with Harold purportedly playing a direct role in the emperor's blinding and exile. Indeed, they made sure that his eyes were useless from that day onwards. Now, during his tenure in the Byzantine Empire, Harald amassed a considerable fortune through his military exploits and strategic engagements, including participating in what the sagas describe as palace plunder following the death of an emperor. This wealth not only showed his prowess, but also played a role in his future ambitions for the Norwegian crown. His astuteness in securing this wealth is highlighted by his decision to send his amassed fortune to Kievan Rus for safekeeping under Yaroslav the Wise, demonstrating a very high level of trust and diplomatic ties with the Kievan ruler. Harald's departure from Constantinople, after being denied permission by Empress Zoe, showcased his daring and resourcefulness. Escaping with 2 ships, he overcame formidable defenses to sail into the Black Sea, though one of his ships was lost to the Byzantine chain defenses across the Bosphorus. This bold escape did not diminish his respect and loyalty towards the Byzantine Empire, however, as later accounts commend the enduring loyalty and love he held for the empire, even after becoming the King of Norway. Returning to Kievan Rus in 1042, Harald's alliance with Yaroslav the Wise was further solidified through his marriage to Elisif, Yaroslav's daughter. The marriage, potentially arranged during his initial stay in Rus, or perhaps upon his return, was a strategic move, aligning him with one of the most powerful rulers of the time. Despite initial rebuffs due to his then insufficient wealth, Harold's eventual marriage to Elisif placed him among the ranks of Europe's elite, marrying into a family connected to other significant European monarchs. In early 1045, Harald set out from Novgorod to reclaim the Norwegian throne, a journey that took him through Russia's waterways to Sweden. Of course, his ships were laden with gold, and that shows that he was very confident in his win. Of course, you wouldn't bring all the gold with you if you weren't. By the time he reached Sweden, the throne had seen a change. Magnus the Good, Olaf Haraldsson's illegitimate son, had established a stable rule over Norway, and he even extended his reign over Denmark after defeating rival claimants. Well, upon arriving in Sweden, Harald allied with Svein Estridsson and the Swedish king Anund Jacob to challenge Magnus. Their initial military strategy involved raiding the Danish coast to undermine Magnus's authority and sway the populace to their side. Well, despite all their efforts, the people of Norway remained loyal to Magnus, who returned from abroad with his army to defend his reign. A conflict seemed imminent, but instead of engaging in battle, a compromise was brokered in 1046. Harald and Magnus agreed to co-rule Norway, with the condition that Harald share half of his wealth with the financially strained Magnus. It's not a bad deal. I can think of worse ones. This co-rule, marked by tension and separate courts, lasted until Magnus's death, which was only about a year later, in 1047. This, of course, left the kingdom without an heir. And I'm sure you can figure out what happens next. Harald swiftly moved to consolidate his power, proclaiming himself the ruler of both Norway and Denmark, and this was despite Magnus's wishes, his explicit instructions for Svein to inherit Denmark. Well, his assertion faced resistance, of course, notably from Einar Thambarskelfir, very difficult name to say, a prominent chieftain who preferred the deceased Magnus to any living king. Well, despite Harald's initial reluctance, Magnus's body was transported back to Norway for burial beside Saint Olaf, cementing his legacy. Under Harald's reign, Norway saw significant administrative reforms, including the introduction of a royal monopoly on coin minting. Harald set his sights on reclaiming and expanding the North Sea Empire, once ruled by Knut the Great, beginning with Denmark. The initial plan to invade Denmark in 1047 was postponed, but from 1048 onwards, Harald engaged in nearly annual raids against Svein Estridsson, targeting Danish shores in a series of very violent and swift campaigns. His most notable early actions including the plunder of Jutland and the devastating attack on Hedby in the year of 1049, which was a pretty critical hub of trading in Scandinavia, and after this it never quite recovered. Now, despite all of these successes in battle, Harald was not able to secure a lasting occupation of Denmark. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Nysa in 1062, which was a significant naval engagement where Harald, commanding a fairly sizable fleet, sought a decisive and ultimate victory over Sweyn. The battle resulted in heavy losses on both sides, and ended without a clear victor, as both leaders managed to retreat with fairly substantial forces still intact. Well, exhausted by years of conflict and the toll that it generally takes on people and their kingdoms, Harald decided to seek peace. In 1064, or at least the winter between 1065, an unconditional peace treaty was signed with Sweyn, maintaining the status quo without territorial gains or reparations. Following the treaty, Harald's focus shifted more inward. He embarked on a winter campaign across Norway, enforcing tax collection with a harsh hand, resorting to maiming and killing as punitive measures against those who defied his rule. Harald's reign also saw significant strides in consolidating monarchical power within Norway itself. By asserting that only the king alone could maintain a hird, which was a private standing army, he basically centralized military power and diminished the influence of all of those smaller local warlords. His ascent to the Norwegian throne marked the beginning of a critical phase in the country's unification under a single ruler. Recognizing the need for a good amount of domestic support, Harald strategically aligned himself with the Norwegian aristocracy by marrying Tora Torbursdatter, linking him to one of Norway's most influential families. This move was pretty important in Harald's effort to stabilize his rule and navigate the complexities of power dynamics at the time, particularly against this backdrop of opposition from descendants of Hakon Sigurdsson, who had held sway over northern Norway and the region of Trøndelag. Well, the legacy of his rule, that Hakon Sigurdsson, which spanned from 975 to 995, was looming large in the collective memory, with his family maintaining a significant degree of autonomy even after his death. Einar Thambarskelfir, a key figure within this dynasty and married to Hakon's daughter, initially maintained a cordial relationship with Magnus, Harald's predecessor. However, Harald's absolutionist approach led to friction with Einar, setting the stage for a confrontation that would solidify Harald's reputation as an uncompromising leader, earning him that moniker Hardrada, which means literally hard ruler. Stop giggling. Now, the tension reached a boiling point in Nidaros, where Einar, in a bold show of defiance, arrived at Harald's court with a substantial armed retinue. The situation began to boil over, culminating in Einar's assassination by Harald's men, a decisive moment that significantly weakened the opposition from the Earls of Lade and reinforced Harald's control over Trøndelag and the broader realm. In the years that followed, Harald's governance was characterized by both military campaign and domestic policies, which were aimed at consolidating his rule on all fronts. His interactions with Hakon Ivarsson, a distinguished and feared warrior in the Battle of Nisa, show the complex dynamic of loyalty and power during his reign. Despite initial favor, Harald's reluctance to fulfill his promise of an earldom to Hakon led to unrest and ultimately Hakon's revolt, which was a factor in Harald's decision to seek peace with Svein Estridsson. Harald's domestic policies, particularly in the uplands, were marked by ruthless tax collection campaigns and others to subdue dissent. Much of the dissent was because of the tax campaigns, but, well, it had to be sorted out anyway, didn't it? Someone's got to pay the bills. By employing harsh punitive measures, including burning farms and executing and maiming resistors to serve as a warning to others, Harald aimed to integrate these remote regions into his kingdom, thereby strengthening his economic base and securing his rule. By the end of 1065, Harald's efforts to quell opposition and centralize his power had largely been a remarkable success, and this left him as the undisputed ruler of a more unified Norway. Well, his reign was shaped by these extensive military background, and it was characterized by forceful dispute resolution and a penchant for breaking settlements, traits that underscored his reputation on the battlefield also. And despite these aggressive tendencies, his domestic rule is noted by historians of the time as a period of relative peace and prosperity for Norway. He's credited with establishing the Norwegian currency and fostering a new coin-based economy, which of course significantly enhanced Norway's participation in international trade. And those trade networks facilitated trade with regions as diverse as the Kievan Rus, the Byzantine Empire, Scotland, and even Ireland. In addition to all these economic reforms, he also played a role in advancing Christianity in Norway. His reign saw the construction and enhancement of churches, alongside the importation of clergy from abroad, notably from Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. This influx introduced a variant of Christianity that slightly differed from that was practiced in the rest of northern Europe, which, of course, sparked a little bit of controversy and raised some eyebrows within the Catholic Church. There's only so much you can get away with changing it. Well, Harald's assertive responses to papal legates, declaring himself the sole authority in Norway, mirrors the centralized control that's typical of Byzantine leadership, indicating the possible influence of his Eastern experiences on his religious policies. But it wasn't all just about being at home. He had a great great interest in exploration, both within and beyond Norway. Domestic ventures into regions like the uplands and ambitious naval expeditions into the northern seas show his curiosity and determination to chart the unknown. Reports by contemporaries like Adam of Bremen suggest Harald's expeditions reached the far edges of the known world, possibly encountering territories such as Spitsbergen or Novaya Zemlya. These exploratory endeavors, possibly inspired by the tales of Vinland, underscore Harald's role as a visionary leader, certainly keen on expanding his knowledge and influence across his own realm and beyond it. Well, his ambitions, having been stymied in Denmark, turned towards England, with a historical claim rooted in an agreement from 1038 between Magnus the Good and Harthacnut, the then ruler of England. This agreement showed that upon the death of one, the other would inherit the kingdom. So if Magnus the Good died, Harthacnut would be the king, and vice versa. However, with Harthacnut's childless death in 1042, Edward the Confessor came to the throne, which of course sidelined Magnus's claim. Despite the implications of the agreement, actual succession to the English throne would inevitably involve military action, a reality that both Magnus and his successor Harald recognized rather early on. Upon Magnus's death in 1047, Harald inherited not just the Norwegian crown, but also this contentious claim to England. Edward the Confessor, well aware of the looming threats to his rule, strategically kept his potential rivals, including Harald, Sweyn of Denmark, and William of Normandy, in a state of anticipation over the succession. An initial foray in 1058 by Harald's forces into England in support of a Welsh raid, perhaps one or two dipped their toes in and test the waters, but it also showed the impracticality of engaging on two fronts against both Denmark and England. It was just too much at one time. Now, these ambitions dramatically shifted with the death of Edward in January 1066. And if you know that year, I'm sure you can guess what battle is coming up. And of course the subsequent crowning of Harold Godwinson as the King of England. Tostig Godwinson, ousted Earl of Northumbria and brother to the new king, emerged as a pivotal figure, seeking to reclaim his lost titles and his lost lands. His outreach to both William of Normandy and Sweyn Estridsson, though speculative, shows a breadth of aspirations. However, it was with Harald Hardrada that Tostig first found a more receptive ally, given the strategic advantages of northern England for a Norwegian invasion. It's certainly a short trip. Now, in the spring of 1066, Harald began mustering a formidable fleet in Solund, signaling the seriousness of his intent. By September, a fleet led by the iconic oarmen, whose name meant serpent, was ready and raring to go. Harald's departure from Norway was marked by quite a lot of preparations, including ensuring the continuity of his lineage by proclaiming his son Magnus as king, and also bringing his family along for the campaign. The addition of forces from the Orkney Islands and the support of Malcolm III of Scotland further strengthened his army, and it shows a concerted effort to marshal a substantial force against England. The eventual rendezvous of Harald and Tostig at Tynemouth set the stage for one of medieval period's most pivotal conflicts. Tostig's modest fleet bellied the strategic significance of his alliance with Harald. Meanwhile, deceptive measures by Tostig in the south hinted at a Normandy invasion, distracting Harald Godwinson and fragmenting the English defence, just as the Norwegian and Scottish force was preparing to strike. After setting sail from Tynemouth, Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson's forces made landfall at the River Tees, marking the beginning of their campaign in England proper. Their journey led them to Cleveland, where they initiated a series of raids along the coast, the start of a trail of destruction and plunder. The resistance they encountered in Scarborough, where the locals opposed Harold's demands for surrender, resulted in Harold setting fire to the entire town, a brutal tactic that precipitated the surrender of other Northumbrian towns who did not want the same treatment in the face of a Norse onslaught. Well, continuing their campaign, Harald and Tostig navigated their fleet up the Humber and disembarked at Riccal on the 20th of September. The news of their advance and the early raids galvanized the local English leadership, prompting Earls Morcar of Northumbria and Edwin of Mercia to confront the invaders. The ensuing Battle of Fulford, fought just south of the modern city of York, ended in a decisive victory for the Nordic forces. The triumph not only showed Harold's military skill, but it also led to the strategic surrender of the city of York to Harold and Tostig on the 24th of September, marking a significant moment in the invasion, as it represented the last time a Scandinavian army would achieve such a feat over English forces. But then again, who knows if the Norwegians are going to invade England in the near future? Well, meanwhile, Harald Godwinson, the newly crowned King of England, had been making his own preparations. On the same day that York capitulated, Harold arrived with his army in Tadcaster, positioning himself a mere 11 kilometers from Harald's fleet stationed at Riccal. Utilizing the element of surprise and strategic reconnaissance, Godwinson likely addressed the Norwegian fleet's position, laying the groundwork for a surprise attack. With Harold having left no forces to secure York with, he was able to march through the town unopposed, advancing towards Stamford Bridge. On the morning of the 25th of September, that great moment that would shape the course of English history, Hardrada and Godwinson departed from their strategic position at Riccal, unwittingly heading towards their fate. Leaving behind a significant portion of their force, they advanced with the majority of the men, donning only light armor in anticipation of meeting with the citizens of York at Stamford Bridge. This meeting was intended to formalize the town's submission under Harold's rule. Easy day. What could possibly go wrong? However, upon their arrival, instead of encountering this expected delegation ready to hand over the entire town to them, they were met by the formidable sight of Harald Godwinson's well-armored and significantly larger force. Godwin's forces included up to 15,000 foot soldiers, accompanied by 2,000 cavalry, while Hardrada only had with him 9,000 foot soldiers, no cavalry, and a couple hundred ships which, not really good on land, aren't they? Caught completely off guard, but determined to stand their ground, Harald and Tostig hastily organized their men into a shield wall. The ensuing battle saw a momentary advantage for the Norse, when a single giant Norwegian warrior defending the bridge held back the English forces, buying precious time for Harald's army to regroup. Indeed, one guy on the bridge, a complete psycho. Berserker is the term, and I suppose we can use it in this context. A blood-drunk maniac, wildly flailing his weapon everywhere, making people too frightened to even approach him. You can imagine it, all the Viking stereotypes into one. Well, despite this heroic stand, the Norse forces ultimately faced overwhelming odds. The battle reached its climax when Harald, in a berserk frenzy, and without the protection of any body armor, was struck down by an arrow to the throat, straight through the neck. His aggressive tactics and refusal to don armor, characteristic of his fearless leadership, ultimately led to his rather early demise on the battlefield, though quite a fitting end for a Viking warrior, don't you think? The tide of battle did seem to momentarily turn with the late arrival of Eystein Or and the reserve forces from Rikal, who, despite being completely exhausted from the rapid march, launched a desperate counterattack under the banner of Land Waster. It's all extremely metal, isn't it? While this final effort briefly threatened to break through the English lines, until Eystein himself was taken out. He died, and it caused the Norsemen's resolve to crumble, ultimately leading to their retreat. Well, either way, the battle was devastating for both sides. Godwinson lost about 5,000 men, while 6,000 to 8,000 were lost on Hardrada's side, and Hardrada himself, of course. Arrow to the neck, not a good way to go. The aftermath of the battle saw the decimated Norse army allowed to retreat peacefully, including Harald's son Olaf. The remnants of Harald's forces, significantly reduced in number, returned to Norway, leaving behind a notable contingent from Scotland and the Orkney Islands at Rikal, whose fates were not accounted for in the Norse retreat. And that's the end of the life of Harald Hardrada. Was it all that you expected? I thought it was interesting. We all learned a lot today, didn't we? I'd like to thank my Mega Chad tier Patreon supporters, being Stark Factory, JC, and Jeffrey. If you want to support on the Patreon, you know what to do. Also, like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And I wish you all the best, and I will see you in the next episode. Good night, everyone. Look after yourself.